They didn't call ahead. That was the first thing I noticed when my stepmother's car pulled into the driveway on a Tuesday afternoon. No text, no warning, just the sound of gravel crunching under tires while I was still in my robe, coffee in hand, staring out the kitchen window of the apartment I had spent 3 years paying for on my own. I was 31 years old. I had a lease in my name, a job I had clawed my way into, and a savings account I treated like a second religion. None of that mattered the moment my father stepped out of the passenger seat and looked up at my building like he was appraising it for demolition. Let me back up. My name is Claire. My mother died when I was 9, and my father remarried 14 months later, a speed that, at the time, I was too young to understand and too old to pretend was normal. My stepmother's name is Renata. She came with a daughter named Becca, who was 2 years younger than me, and who, from the first week she moved into our house, treated my bedroom like a hotel she hadn't paid for. My father loved Renata the way some men love a second chance, desperately, completely, and at the expense of everything that came before. I watched it happen slowly, the way you watch a tide come in. First, it was small things. My mother's photos moved from the living room to a box in the garage. Then my mother's china was replaced with a new set Renata picked out. Then it was my college fund, which my father explained, very calmly, over dinner one night when I was 16, would be split between me and Becca, because we're a family now. And families share. Becca had done nothing to earn that money. She knew it. I knew it. My father had decided that acknowledging that fact was the same as being selfish. I learned very early that in our house, my needs were a burden and Becca's were a baseline. I left for college on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. My father contributed exactly what remained of my half of the fund, a number that had, mysteriously, shrunk by the time I turned 18. I didn't ask questions. I had learned by then that asking questions only resulted in a conversation about how ungrateful I was. After college, I moved across the state. I built something small, but mine, a job in healthcare administration, an apartment, with a window that faced east so I could drink my coffee in actual sunlight, a life that didn't require me to make myself smaller to fit inside it. I saw my father twice a year. Thanksgiving, and whatever weekend in summer he decided to pass through. He never stayed long. Renata usually had something else going on. So when they showed up unannounced on that Tuesday in March, I knew it wasn't a visit. I opened the door before my father could knock. He looked the same as always, tall, a little gray at the temples, wearing the expression he reserved for conversations he had already decided the outcome of. Renata stood behind him in a cream-colored blouse, her handbag tucked under her arm like punctuation. Becca wasn't with them. Which meant whatever this was, they had decided it was a 2-person job. We need to talk, my father said. I stepped back and let them in. They sat on my couch. I did not offer coffee. My father looked around the apartment the way people do when they are trying to figure out what something is worth, and then he folded his hands in his lap and told me that they were in a difficult financial situation. He used the phrase temporary setback. He used the phrase family pulls together. He said that Becca had an opportunity, a real opportunity, a chance at something that could change her life, but that it required capital. They didn't currently have liquid. I waited. He said they needed $50,000. The room was very quiet. I don't have $50,000, I said. My father smiled the smile he used when he thought I was being deliberately obtuse. Claire. We know about the inheritance from your grandmother. I went very still. My grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman named Eleanor who had raised 3 children on a teacher's salary and never once complained about it, had died 8 months earlier. She had left me a small inheritance. Not life-changing money by most standards, but money she had spent decades carefully saving because she wanted me, specifically me, to have options she never did. She had told me this herself, sitting in her kitchen, 2 years before she passed. I had not told my father about it. I had not told anyone in that family about it. How do you know about that? I asked. Renata adjusted her handbag. Becca ran into your cousin at an event last fall. It came up. It came up. $50,000 and a dead woman's wishes. And it simply came up. That money isn't available, I said. My father's expression shifted. Not to anger, not yet, but to something harder. Something I recognized from childhood as the prelude to a lecture about perspective. Claire, I have supported you your entire life. I paid for. You paid for half of a college fund that was supposed to be entirely mine, I said. And I covered the rest myself. That's not. I worked 2 jobs. Every semester. I didn't ask you for anything after I left. And we're not asking for charity. Renata said. Her voice perfectly pleasant, as though pleasantness were a form of pressure. This is a loan. Becca will pay it back. She has a business plan, a real one, and if you would just look at it. I'm not loaning Becca $50,000. The pleasantness evaporated. My father stood up. He did the thing he always did when a conversation wasn't going the direction he intended. He made himself physically large in the room. As though presence alone was an argument. She is your sister. Stepsister, I said. And she is a grown adult who can apply for a business loan like everyone else. Banks won't. I know banks won't. That's information about the quality of her business plan, not a reason for me to hand over my grandmother's money. My father looked at me the way he had looked at me my entire life, when I refused to yield, like I was a problem he couldn't quite solve. An equation that kept producing the wrong answer. Your grandmother would have wanted you to help family. That landed the way he intended it to. I felt it in my chest. My grandmother, I said, quietly, specifically excluded you and Renata from her estate. You were in the will. She made a choice. Please don't tell me what she would have wanted. The silence after that was a different kind of quiet. Renata stood. She picked up her handbag with a precise, controlled motion. I think we should let Claire reconsider, she said to my father, as though I weren't in the room. She'll come around. They left. I stood in my apartment for a long time after the sound of their car disappeared. Then I called my grandmother's estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had handled Eleanor's affairs with the kind of careful professionalism my grandmother had specifically sought out, and I told her what had happened. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Claire, she said. There's something I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. I think this is the moment. I sat down on my couch. Patricia explained that my grandmother had anticipated, with striking accuracy, the possibility that my father's side of the family might learn about the inheritance and apply pressure. Eleanor had not been a woman who left things to chance. In addition to the funds I already knew about, she had placed a secondary asset in trust, a commercial property she had owned outright since the 1980s. A small building on the edge of a town in Vermont where she had grown up, that had been leasing steadily to a local business for decades. The trust had a specific provision. The asset was not to be disclosed to me until I had demonstrated that I could hold the line, Patricia's words, which she said were close to Eleanor's own against pressure from my father's household. She wanted to make sure you didn't need it, Patricia said. She knew that if you knew about it before you were tested, you might give it away to keep the peace. I pressed my hand over my mouth. The property is worth approximately $340,000 at current valuation, Patricia said. And it has been generating rental income for 11 years. There is also a letter. The letter arrived by courier 3 days later, in an envelope with my grandmother's handwriting on the front. I sat with it unopened on my kitchen table for almost an hour before I could bring myself to read it. Eleanor wrote the way she talked, plainly, without decoration. With a precision that made every sentence feel like it had been chosen carefully and meant exactly what it said. She told me she was proud of me. She said she had watched me navigate an unfair situation with more grace than she would have managed. She said she was sorry she hadn't intervened more directly when I was young, and that this was her attempt to correct, in whatever way she still could, an imbalance that should never have existed. The last paragraph said, "Don't let them make you feel guilty for keeping what is yours. I built that slowly and carefully, and I built it for you. Use it for something that makes your life larger, not smaller. You've been making yourself small for long enough." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I sat quietly for a while and let myself feel something I didn't have a clean word for. Grief and gratitude collapsed together into something that felt like being held. My father called that weekend. He had apparently given me the time he felt was appropriate for reconsideration, and he opened the conversation as though the previous visit had been a rough draft and he was now presenting a cleaner version of the same argument. The loan was now structured differently, he explained. There was a repayment timeline. He had written something up. "I've made my decision," I said. "Claire. I've also spoken to Patricia Holt again." A pause. "I've retained her to handle some additional estate matters," I said. "I wanted you to know. Because a few of those matters involve a review of the original estate disbursement, including the portion of my mother's personal property that was transferred to your household after she died. My mother's jewelry. Her books. A rocking chair her own grandmother had made. Things that had disappeared into the house I grew up in and never been discussed again. That was years ago," my father said. His voice was different now. "Careful. Patricia thinks there may be a discrepancy between what was inventoried and what was actually transferred to me as the named heir." I paused. "I'm not sure yet. We're still looking at the documents." There was a long silence. "I don't want this to become something adversarial," my father said. "Neither do I." I said. "I never have. That's never been my choice." He hung up. I didn't hear from Renata. I didn't expect to. What I heard from, 3 weeks later, was my cousin on my mother's side, a woman named Dana who had been at the same event where Becca had apparently learned about my inheritance. Dana called to tell me, a little hesitantly, that Becca had been telling people in their social circle that I had promised to fund her business and then backed out at the last minute, that I had made her a commitment and broken it out of spite. I had never spoken to Becca about her business. Not once. I had never made any commitment of any kind. Becca had constructed an entire narrative, complete with details, and distributed it to the people most likely to relay it back to me. I called Patricia. Then I called a different attorney, one who specialized in defamation and tortious interference, and I had a very informative conversation about what options existed when someone made materially false statements about a business matter to third parties. I didn't file anything. I want to be clear about that. But I had the attorney send a letter. The letter was brief. It outlined the false statements that had been made, identified the parties involved, noted that documentation existed, and indicated that any further statements of this nature would be met with formal legal action. Becca called me 40 minutes after the letter was delivered. I know this because Patricia had arranged for the delivery to be confirmed and time-stamped. You sent a lawyer letter to my mother, Becca said. She was not using her pleasant voice. She was using a voice I had heard before, the one that lived underneath the pleasantness. I sent a letter to you, I said. Addressed to you. If your mother read your mail, that's a separate matter. This is insane. We're family. You told people I broke a promise I never made. About a business I was never involved in. To people in my professional network. It wasn't, I was venting. People talk. People also listen, I said. And remember. She went quiet. Becca, I said. And I tried to say it without heat. Because I genuinely had no interest in cruelty. I don't want to be in conflict with you. I never have. But I need you to understand something. My grandmother's money is not available to your family. It was not left to your family. It was left to me, for specific reasons, by a woman who thought carefully about what she was doing. That is the end of it. Another silence. My dad really thought you'd help, she said, finally. And there was something in it, not quite an apology, but something adjacent to one, something that sounded like she might, in some part of herself, understand how this had looked from the outside. I know, I said. That's not my problem to fix. I hung up. For the next several weeks, I thought about what to do with the property in Vermont. I drove up to see it on a Saturday in April, when the trees were just beginning to turn green at the edges. It was a modest building brick, 2 stories, a storefront on the ground level with a small apartment above that the tenant didn't use. The town was quiet in the way that small New England towns are quiet, with the particular stillness of a place that has been there a long time and expects to remain. I stood in front of it for a while. I thought about my grandmother driving past it every day when she was young. I thought about her buying it when she was in her 50s, probably with money she had saved carefully for years, and then just quietly holding onto it for decades, like a secret she was keeping from me. The tenant, a woman who ran a framing shop on the ground floor, came out when she saw me standing on the sidewalk. She had known Eleanor. She said my grandmother used to stop in every few months and look at the art in the window. She said Eleanor had told her once that the building would go to her granddaughter eventually, and that she hoped the granddaughter would keep it. I told her I planned to. I drove home with the windows down, and I thought about what my grandmother had written. Use it for something that makes your life larger, not smaller. I had been thinking about going back to school. A graduate program in healthcare policy that I had been looking at for 2 years, and talking myself out of for practical reasons, cost, time, the vague anxiety of doing something significant. The rental income from the property would cover the cost of the program with room left over. I applied that month. I was accepted in June. My father sent a birthday card in July. It was brief, a few lines, the kind of card that acknowledges an occasion without saying very much. He didn't mention the attorney letters. He didn't mention the money. He signed it with just his name. I sent one back. I signed it the same way. I don't know what we are to each other now. I know what we were. I spent most of my life knowing what we were and hoping it would change. I have arrived, slowly and without any single dramatic moment of clarity, at a place where I no longer need it to. Some relationships do not transform. Some people do not see you differently no matter what you do. And the only adjustment available is the one you make in yourself, the decision to stop auditioning for an approval that was never going to be offered. My grandmother saw me. She saw me clearly and from a distance and across years. And she did what she could with the tools she had. I think about her most mornings when I sit by the east-facing window with my coffee, the same way I always have, except now the cup is a little fuller and the light comes in a little earlier because I moved to an apartment on a higher floor. It's a small thing. But so is every choice she made that added up to the letter in that envelope. I start my program in September. I have already picked out where I want to sit in the lecture hall near the window, on the left side. Where the afternoon light is good. My grandmother would have approved. She had excellent taste in light.